Good morning. The June 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the board will continue to meet virtually. At this time, I will ask Comptroller Henry for any corrections, additions, and noted abstentions from today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have the following changes or corrections on page 57. Item number 6, Department of Transportation, extra work order number 1 under Northwest Sector 2, insert $1,357,803.55. We have the following protests on pages 100 to 101. Items number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works, Office of Engineering and Construction, SC 954 primary settling tanks, numbers 3 and 4, rehabilitation at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. Protests and responses were received from Miles and Stockbridge PC on behalf of American Contracting and Environmental Services Incorporated, and Robert Fulton DeShiel Esquire on behalf of Ullman Schutte Construction LLC. On pages 106 to 107, Department of Finance, Fiscal 2022, Visit Baltimore Incorporated, Baltimore Tourism Improvement District Financial Plan and Special Assessment Rate. A supplemental protest was received from Lewis C. Fields, President of the Baltimore African American Tourism Council Incorporated. The following items are being deferred or withdrawn. On page 14, item number 7, Personnel Department of General Services Amendment to Agreement with Christine Jurek is being withdrawn. On page 105, number 9, Bureau of Procurement B500006139, Armed Security Guards is being deferred until July 14th. On page 37, item number 1, Bureau of Procurement contract number 08000, staging equipment at the Baltimore Convention Center is being deferred until July 14th. On page 1, item number 1, pre-qualification of contractors, Asplund Tree Expert LLC is being withdrawn. The following items are being moved to the non-routine agenda. On page 8, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. On page 45, number 13, Bureau of Procurement, contract number B500005554, Management of Parking Garages, Group 4. And then on pages 100 and 101, items number 1 and 2, Department of Public Works, Office of Engineering and Construction, SC 954, primary settling tanks numbers 3 and 4, rehabilitation at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant. And on pages 106 to 107, Department of Finance, Fiscal 2022, Visit Baltimore Incorporated, Baltimore Tourism Improvement District Financial Plan and Special Assessment Rate. No items are being moved to the routine agenda, and we have the following abstentions. Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on page 32, item number 8, Health Department ratification of amendment to agreement with the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine emergency financial assistance. There are no other abstentions for any other board member. That is it for changes and corrections, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now direct the board's attention to the memorandum from my office dated June 21st, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items. Together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by our Comptroller, I will entertain a motion to approve the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is now adopted. Now on to the first item of the non-routine agenda that can be found on page 8, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. This item deals with the proposed settlement to claim that stems from a fall on a damaged sidewalk. At this time, I would like to recognize representative from the Department of Law to walk us through this item. Is someone on from the Law Department to speak to this issue?
Yes, Mr. President, Darnell Ingram from the Law Department.
I would yield the floor to the Deputy City Solicitor. Mr. Ingram, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Board of Estimates, Council President, Comptroller Henry, Solicitor, and Mr. Garbach. I'm Darnell Ingram on behalf of the Law Department, responding to the request for a $30,000 settlement in the matter of Ms. Sharon Spencer versus the Mayor and City Council of Baltimore. This Law Department is requesting a $30,000 settlement stemming from an incident that occurred on and about June 20th, 2018, around 3 p.m. at the 1600 block north of Carey Street. The plaintiff, Ms. Spencer, was walking and tripped and fell due to an uneven sidewalk. She suffered a broken wrist and injury due to the substantial injury that she incurred, with an amount of damages of over $8,000, and the liability that the city may be exposed to. The city is requesting $30,000 to resolve this matter and a full release from the city for any liability stemming from that particular incident. With that, the Law Department requests that the Board of Estimates approve the settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Solicitor. At this point, I yield the floor to Mr. Comptroller. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Deputy Solicitor, I'm sorry, did you say when Ms. Spencer tripped and injured herself?
Yes, sir. June 20th, 2018.
Oh, June 20th. Okay, so we just passed the 3-year anniversary date. Did the city already have notice of the cracked sidewalk at that time?
Yes, the year previously, the city had noticed due to request to fix the particular location.
And so that's what creates our liability and why it would be important for us to settle.
Correct.
Okay. So when did Ms. Spencer file her claim with the city? Was it right away in 2018?
She filed a claim relatively shortly after the incident.
Okay, because if you go onto Google Street View, you can see that some patches have been made to that section of sidewalk. When did DOT make the initial repairs?
I believe the repair was remedied the previous year in 2019. Not the subsequent year in 2019.
And actually, before I go to DOT, let me ask you one more question. This is sort of following up on an issue we had at the board a couple weeks back with a tripping hazard over in Southeast. Can you give us an update yet on the law department's efforts to try to work out a process so that city agencies address unsafe conditions and follow up on mitigating risk as soon as the city knows that a claim has been filed?
Yes. So currently the law department has undergone an internal process to identify hazards that may cause injury to pedestrians and or people traversing across the city. With that, the process entails collecting data, ascertaining locations and demographic information, and with that, we will create and develop a communication strategy to work with the agencies to ensure that they remedy the issue, so that if we are notified as to a particular claim, those incidents can be remedied as soon as possible. And it will be a synergistic approach, as well as collaborative effort to ensure that these liabilities are remedied.
So from a project management perspective, is it your expectation that you're going to keep this inside the Department of Law so that somebody there is the one who will follow up and potentially nag the operational agencies to go out and make these fixes? Or do you think that there's is there an expectation of turning the project management over to like constituent services in the mayor's office or city administrator's office or something like that?
That's a great question, Comptroller Henry. At this point, the law department is taking the onus on itself to create this process to ensure that it's implemented. Thereafter, we will be coordinating with the city administrator's office to ensure an effective way that this process will be continued in Baltimore City.
Okay, thank
And right now,
you.
we're in the building stages of this, so hopefully this will be resolved and finalized in the next few months.
In that case, I just have one quick question for DOT, which is, can you talk to the board about any additional work that's still planned for the 1600 block of North Cary in terms of improving the sidewalks in that area more generally?
So I want to say south or north end, I believe, north or south end. Part of within the last 3 years, part of the street or sidewalk was totally redone. There is another part where the tripping hazard occurred, which was made safe, but that will be fully repaired this summer.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. President, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there additional questions or concerns from any other members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve or defer, to approve or reject this item.
Move approval.
Second.
It's been approved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is now approved. Now on to our next item on the non-routine agenda. It can be found on pages 100 and 191, items 1 and 2. Recommendations of contract awards rejections. SC 954, primary settling tanks number 3 and 4 rehabilitation at the Back River wastewater treatment plant. The recommendation is to award the contract in the amount of $26,423,800 to All-Amine Schutte Construction LLC. This is also a related transfer of funds. A protest has been received on this item by Mr. Jeremy Schultz of Miles and Stockbridge on behalf of the American Contracting and Environmental Service Incorporated. A response to the protest has been received by Mr. Robert DeShiel on behalf of All-Amine Schutte. We will hear first from DPW, then from the makers of the protest, and then from the respondents. We'll begin with DPW. I believe we have Julie Day on from DPW. Ms. Day, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. City Administrator, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members of the Board of Estimates. I'm Julie Day. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Department of Public Works. I'm here today speaking about Sanitary Contract 954. This contract is for the rehabilitation of 2 primary settling tanks at the Back River wastewater treatment plant. It's a critical project to ensure that the plant is functioning at peak performance now that the Headworks project has been brought online. The award of this contract was considered by the board a number of weeks ago. There was a protest made against the award and the item was deferred for a number of meetings, bringing it here this morning before the board. For this project, DPW received 3 bids. The lowest bid was rejected as non-responsive because the vendor listed an MBE subcontractor that was not certified by the city. The second lowest bidder was found to be both responsible and responsive at the time of the bid. That bidder is All-Amine Schutte. DPW has recommended awarding the contract to All-Amine Schutte. The third lowest bidder, American Contracting and Environmental Services, known as ACES, filed a protest against the award. ACES raised issue with one of the MBE subcontractors identified by All-Amine Schutte. The item was deferred to consider the issues that were raised. During the period of deferral, the MBE firm, which was the subject of the protest, notified the city of its inability to continue as a certified MBE and withdrew from the entirety of the MBE program. This raised a unique issue for All-Amine Schutte. This raised a unique issue as All-Amine Schutte was compliant with MBE requirements when the award was submitted to the board, but it is no longer compliant. Similar issues have arisen when an MBE has dropped out before submission to the board, as well as after award by the board. But the board has not considered this issue when the award is before the board, but not yet awarded. In consultation with the Law Department and the Minority and Women Business Opportunity Office, DPW is recommending award to All-Amine Schutte contingent upon their substituting certified MBEs in place of the MBE that has withdrawn. This is consistent with similar instances where MBEs have withdrawn before submission to the board as well as after. Ullman Shooty has proposed 3 MBE certified subcontractors for substitution pending approval by this board. Mr. President, with your approval, I will defer to the Law Department at this time, who can provide additional information and background on this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Day. At this point, we'll yield the floor to the Law Department.
Good morning, Mr. President, Mr. City Administrator, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members. I'm Mike Mullen from the Law Department. This is, as Ms. Day just said, an issue of first impression before the board. Neither the city code nor the procurement regulations address this specific situation. The code and the procurement regulations do allow substitution of an MBE at the time of bid opening, and you may also request substitution after an award has been made by the Board of Estimates. Then a substitution can also be allowed under both the code and the procurement regulations. This present situation is unusual in that the bidder, Ullman Shooty, lost its MBE sub after bid opening, but before the board could award or resolve the issue. So we looked at this and went back about 9 years or so looking at board minutes and could not find any record of the BOE having been presented with this precise situation. So it is an issue of first impression. The board has the authority to either allow the substitution of the MBE as DPW is recommending, or deny it in the board's sound discretion. You'll be setting a precedent however you decide this issue. So, and I would be pleased to answer any questions if there are any questions left from the board members.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. At this point, are there any additional questions for either DPW or the Law Department? At this point, we'll turn it over to Comptroller Henry. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's not a whole lot of questions. Something occurred to me that you said we have already had situations where a subcontractor was switched out after an award. And what occurred to me listening to the history of this item just, in the last couple of months is ACE's protest focused very heavily on the particular MBE subcontractor for Ullman Shooty. And then before the board had a chance to make a decision based on the issues raised, the subcontractor withdrew themselves. In situations where the subcontractor is swapped out after award, does that have to come back to the Board of Estimates for approval?
Speaking for the Law Department, I'm not sure if MBU has to come back to the board or not. I know there's a process that's spelled out in the procurement regs and in the city code for that, but I don't know if it actually comes back to the board or if it's handled internally in the MBU office.
The reason that just occurred to me is there was the opportunity to protest concerns with both the prime and the subcontractors during the awarding process, during this decision-making process before the board. If there is an opportunity to swap out the subcontractors post-award, I'm just wondering how anyone is that protestable? Because it seems like it should be if there are concerns with the subcontractor, as there were previously, but I don't know how anyone would know to protest if it doesn't come back to the board for approval.
Right, it's already been awarded, so there would be no vehicle to protest. And I don't think that MBU does come back to the board. It's handled once the contractor has met the requirements under the code and the procurement regs, then MBU has the authority to swap it out. Now, it happens so infrequently that I haven't seen this before, so I can't. That's why I'm kind of hesitant to say whether they do or they don't. I don't think MBU is on on the line, and perhaps they are, and they can speak to this.
Yes, Darnell Ingram is here to talk about any inbuilt concerns.
Okay, well, so I'm not sure that this is something that can be wrapped up in, before we have to deal with this particular situation. But maybe if we could just sort of put a pin in the broader concept of should we be looking at a process change down the line to ensure that there continues to be some level of transparency post-award if contractors or if subcontractors are being swapped out. I don't think that this is going to be relevant in this particular case, but if hypothetically the subcontractor for whom concerns had been raised had walked away from the job, and then 6 months from now they were swapped back in, then it would have, as I understand it right now, the board would have missed the opportunity to determine whether there were legitimate concerns about that subcontractor if these swappings don't come back to the board. But I think that's a process issue for us to address, and my office will follow up with DPW and the law department and procurement and make a recommendation to the mayor and the council president.
And on that subject, Mr. Comptroller, I just checked the procurement regs, and they do not speak to it coming back to the board.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
President?
Yes, Mr. Garbach, the floor is yours.
Just a quick question, clarification, Mr. Mullen, Deputy Solicitor Ingram. My understanding is when those situations happen after award, it's the subcontractor has actually gone out of business or is actually not just swapped out, but they are essentially not an entity anymore that is even capable of performing the work. So I don't think it's a swap out so much as the entity no longer exists or is incapable of doing the work. Is that correct?
That's correct. It could be many factors such as non-performance, breach of contract, or as you rightfully said, a business may have closed shop and they're unable to perform. And performance is an issue. However, for transparency purposes, I understand the concept. However, there may be an inefficiency aspect in reference to the continued prosecution and operations of city government if these issues are being brought back to the board, specifically concerning a contractual issue as opposed to award of a contract. And I think those are the balances that the Board of Estimates will need to ponder over.
Mr. Garbach, are you done with your questions or concerns?
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I have one question for the administration. Some serious allegations were brought by the second lowest bidder. And I think it provided a tremendous amount of exposure that the city of Baltimore needs to develop ways of identifying resources to provide the MBU to ensure that kind of the level of detail of allegations that were brought forth before this board can be investigated. I guess at this point, with the decision of putting this back on the agenda for this week, has the administration been able to do any of the investigatory work of the allegations associated with the original subprime that has dropped off since? I'm not sure if the law department or DPW can speak to that.
I can speak to it, Mr. President, or Solicitor Shea.
No, go ahead.
The law department has started its internal investigation as to the veracity of these allegations, and we are making decisions moving forward how to determine what type of level of investigation it undertakes. But that is our responsibility, and we are looking to see how to move forward in this investigation, if any.
Understood. And again, we're going to continue to hear from the protester as well as the respondents. But that seems very problematic to me. We operate in a very transparent nature in which we presented to the citizens of Baltimore what appear to be serious allegations as it relates to the integrity of our MBE program. Us internally, as it relates to our vetting process of MBEs, but then also as it relates to the responsibility of our primary and their subcontractors. Now we see a couple weeks later, after it's been off, we place it back on, and subsequent to that, the mysterious out-of-town MBE firm is no longer part of this project. Now we've identified, the primary has identified local MBE firms that obviously can do the work on time and at budget, and now it's before this board to approve. That has taken place without us understanding and knowing the motivation or any of the involvement associated with the alleged concerns that were brought before this board. So I just want to make for the record that at this point, we do not know if those allegations were true or not. But this board has, in this point, decided to put it back on the agenda to move forward. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for the administration? Hearing and seeing none, I will go to the protest, which is by Mr. Schultz or Mr. Gooden. Are you on the line?
Good morning. My name is Kelly Lynch. I'm here with my co-counsel, Jeremy Schultz from Miles and Stockbridge. We represent American Contracting and Environmental Services. Our client, Joe Godin, is also on the line. As noted earlier, it's what the city charter mandates is that after opening the bids, the Board of Estimates will award a contract to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder. Here, Ullman Schutte is neither responsive or responsible. The city's regulations allow for waivers in certain situations. And as noted, this is not one of the situations that a waiver can be allowed to substitute an MBE subcontractor. We are past bidding, but pre-award. And in that situation, the procurement regulations do not allow for a waiver to change the subcontractor. And to be clear, what's being asked is not a minor irregularity in Ullman's bid. What Highmark, the subcontractor at issue, represented 18.6% of Ullman Schutte's MBE participation. We understand that the Board of Estimates has a significant amount of discretion when making decisions, but notwithstanding that discretion, here, the reason that there are regulations is in order to create consistency and predictability for all stakeholders, including the agencies, including the Board of Estimates, including the offerers and the awardee and the bidders. If the parties can't rely on the regulations, then what is the point of having them? The RFP here required bidders to complete its MBE package forms and submit all information at the time of the bid. Here, it's undisputed that now Ullman's bid, or Ullman no longer meets the requirements of the bid. But even beyond the regulatory aspect, here what Ullman is asking is to modify a major component of their bid after bid opening. But for Highmark's participation in Ullman's bid, Ullman may not have been the low bidder. What they're asking you to do is manipulate the bid process so they can put in a subcontractor that later is removed without reopening the bid to have responsible bidders put in or to award the contract to the lowest responsible and responsive bidder, which here is ACES. And as President Mosby mentioned, this is not a situation where there's a lot of transparency in what is going on. Here, Ullman had Highmark as a subcontractor, which we protested about and provided significant information in our protest showing that Highmark was not able to perform the work that was in the bid. And what's interesting here is that this is not a situation where Ullman was an innocent third party who picked a business and didn't have a background of whether or not Highmark was able to perform under the contract. As is shown in the documents that we've provided, Uluman and Highmark have been working together for over 20 years. When Highmark submitted its application to MBU, they listed that they perform 99% of their business for Uluman. And this is back in 2015 when they last submitted their application for renewal. What we've provided in our first protest is that Highmark does not have any operating office or equipment in Baltimore City. Any of the equipment they use is rented from Uluman. We've provided information that we have that Uluman has basically been using Highmark as a pass-through capacity for the entirety of this 20-year relationship. And this can be clearly shown with the fact that they share employees. Their employees go back and forth between being Uluman employees to Highmark employees to Uluman employees. We provided evidence of a business card from an employee, Andy Van Scoy, which says he's a Highmark employee, but has an Uluman email address. And these things have continued to occur over these 20 years. So what's happening here is that it's disingenuous for Uluman to argue that they were not aware that Highmark was not able to perform under this contract. And it's even more telling that at the time we filed this protest based on whether or not Highmark can perform, they didn't come to this board to defend themselves. Instead, what they did is they withdrew not only from this project, but also from MBU certification. And according to the letter they sent to the Board of Estimates, what they're saying that the reason they've withdrawn is because their owner is sick and because of COVID. But there's plenty of evidence that Uluman is still working with Highmark on other projects. In the last letter that we submitted to this board, there are 3 current projects that we at least found in public records where Uluman is using Highmark as a significant portion of their MBE participation in 3 DC water projects. One that ends its projected completion at the end of this year, one that's ended at projected completion at the end of 2023, and one with a projected completion in 2024. So it's hard to understand how Highmark is not able to currently perform for a project in Baltimore when it's still working on projects for Uluman in DC. And it's also disingenuous to argue that Highmark can no longer participate because of COVID. COVID was going on at the time this bid was happening, and it has continued to go on. It's an easy way out for them to say, oh, we can no longer participate because of COVID. But really, what you can see is that they withdrew after we filed our protest and provided evidence to this Board of Estimates that they were not a proper MBE and did not meet the regulations for Baltimore MBE companies. And just to follow up on what was previously discussed, the procurement regulations do not allow for this type of substitution. There are concerns that you have raised regarding this lack of guidance in the regulations of what happens if they substitute Highmark, or when they substitute Highmark for the different subcontractors that we have not had an opportunity to protest. And this happened. There's nothing in the regulations as noted about this type of situation. I think that's even more clear that means that there shouldn't be a situation here where it's awarded to Uluman Shooty if the regulations do not allow for this type of substitution and when there's no procedures for how to protest this type of substitution for the new subcontractors. We haven't had an opportunity to even know who those subcontractors are, to even know whether or not they are valid MBEs or whether or not they have the ability to perform under this contract. And I think it's also telling that we're at this point where the law department has stated that they have not had the opportunity to even start an internal investigation regarding Highmark. So I think it's premature to decide to award the contract to Uluman when the reason we filed this protest was that we argue that Uluman used Highmark as a pass-through entity, and therefore we're not meeting the regulations under the city's regulations or meeting the MBE participation requirements under this contract. You know, by allowing them, Highmark is now withdrawn without any opportunity to cross-examine or, investigate whether or not they meet the MBE requirements. And there's no internal investigation as to whether, to show that what we have provided is correct. We believe that it is premature to offer an award at this time. And based on everything that we've provided and the arguments today, what is clear is that Ullman, their bid that they offered in this project is non-responsive, and they are a non-responsive and non-responsible bidder. What the city's requirements require is then you go to the next lowest responsive and responsible bidder, which here is ACES. And so we ask that this board follow their own regulations and award the contract to the lowest responsible and responsible bidder, which is ACES. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I just have one quick question for ACES. Your MBE award, your MBE proposal in your bid was what, and to whom? Are they a local MBE firm?
I would
What
defer
percentage?
to, yeah, I would defer to our client, Joe Godin, to answer that.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Our MBE program was for Spence Trucking, which is a local firm, J&G Supply, another local firm, and Spears HVAC. So the three combined firms were added up to the requirement of 26%, and they're all local firms based in Baltimore.
So all three are Baltimore-based businesses?
Yes.
Thank you. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from other members of the board for ACES or their representatives? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to turn the floor over to the respondents. I believe Mr. Robert DeShield is on for Olem Shooting. Mr. DeShield, the floor is yours. Mr. DeShield, you're on mute.
Again, good morning, Mr. President, and other members of the board. I apologize first. I cannot participate with my normal vigor because I discovered at my age that there's certain types of food that just don't agree with my gastroenterological system. I won't name the place, but I won't be visiting there again. Let me say that as a contributing author to both the MBE code and the procurement regulations, what's first, that we of course support the recommendation from DPW, but let me just take a digress for a moment and try to add some clarity to this situation. The way that the MBE code was structured, it was to require that compliance be determined at bid time, and that was done to avoid this very situation, where you have ongoing concerns, ongoing issues, and so forth. And that in light of the fact, in recognition of the fact that the city business has to continue, and at some point you have to determine whether a bidder is in fact in compliance. And so the code was written so that the MBE participation had to be demonstrated in the bid. Now, if you submit a bid and you don't have, you haven't demonstrated compliance, and you think that you have exhausted good faith efforts to do so, you can request a waiver. That didn't happen here because it wasn't necessary. Alderman Shorty, in its package, in fact, included some of the same MBEs that were just disclosed by ACES, but Alderman Shorty, at bid time, which was now well more than a year ago, I think, demonstrated that it, in its bid, that it was intended to use MBEs and WBEs that had been certified by the city's MBU office. Now, what does that certification mean? That certification is not discretionary. Every bidder in every bid is instructed to rely upon, and in fact warned that if they do not utilize the firms that are identified in this MBE directory, their bid will be declared, or is likely to be declared, non-responsive. Alderman Shorty's bid was not non-responsive at the time it was required to be submitted. It was in fact found to be in full compliance by the city's MBU office. Now, that doesn't end the MBU's office investigation or interaction with the contract, no more than it does for the contract administration office and DPW. The MBE law provides a mechanism after contract award and once the work is undertaken for continuing monitoring of MBE participation. The prime contractors have to submit monthly reports demonstrating who they paid money to and the work that's performed. The participation on the site is monitored by city inspectors. All this is part of the contract administration process. You can't do contract administration at bid time, nor can you do it at the time of award. These events necessarily occur after the work is undertaken. Alderman Schulte had nothing to do with Highmark's decision to withdraw either from this contract or from the MBE program. In fact, it cost Alderman Schulte money, because Alderman Schulte, after prices are set, after its bid is in, has to go out, went out voluntarily, by the way. That's the other thing. The Alderman Schulte, at my recommendation, went out to find substituted MBEs and WBEs, not because it was required to, because we didn't request a swap. We didn't request a waiver. We didn't have to. We were already found in compliance. We did that because they did it because I told them to do it. They did that because I believe, and they believe, my client believes, that the MBE program is important enough that even if you don't have to, you still should demonstrate compliance, even after you've been found to be in compliance at the time of initial bid opening, which happened here. What ACS has done is put forth a tapestry of misconstrued and unrelated principles and say, look, let's look at it this way. Well, that's not the way to look at it. If you don't adhere to DPW's recommendation, if you uproot the process by which compliance can be determined at bid time, then there's no time in the future where the matter is ever settled on any contract going forward. You should not take away the obligation, I should say, of MBU to monitor contract on MBE issues any more than you would take away the obligation of contract administration within DPW to monitor the contract for compliance with any other contractual obligations. I think I just want to clarify the process because it's been confused, it's been misrepresented, and there is transparency, Mr. President and Mr. Comptroller. There's full transparency. Because everything that happens with respect to MBE participation or any other element is fully monitored and considered by the appropriate city agencies. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeShield. At this time, are there any questions or concerns? City Administrator Shorter, I see your hand raised. The floor is yours.
A question, Mr. Ingram. Will approval today change anything about your ongoing investigation of this matter?
No.
You're
No,
muted.
sir. No, oh, I'm sorry. No, sir. Mr. Shorter, no, sir. City Administrator Shorter. There will be no impeding an investigation based on the decision today.
Very good. Ms. Day, will the MBE or WBE goals based on approval today be changed at all?
No,
Will any other provision of this contract or the bid be changed based on the approval today?
not that I'm aware.
Mr. President, I move approval of this item.
I believe, so there's a motion to approve as well as a second. Unfortunately, I guess we kind of jumped into that. I'm not sure if there's other members on this board that would like an opportunity to address, particularly the respondent. At the point, I yielded the floor to you, Chief Administrator Shorter, for your opportunity to ask questions. But just like I provided you with that opportunity, I would like to also provide other members of the board with the same opportunity. So again, it's been a motion that's been placed on the floor as well as properly second. But I'll ask board members that in the future, we provide other board members the opportunity to ask subsequent questions as well. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members on this board before we go into the motion that was placed on the floor and properly seconded by the administration? Hearing and seeing none for anybody else, I do have some additional concerns and questions. I believe the fact that the information that was provided is still being investigated as it relates to us taking action today is immaterial. The allegations that were put forth goes directly to the credibility of us as a city to operate an MBE program that I believe all of us would agree has functioned in a less than effective manner for decades. You know, we constantly talk about crime in our city. We constantly talk about the issues of our city. And one thing that I constantly hold high, and I know the administration agrees, is we have to grow jobs in our city. This was a protest that was provided to us where, again, serious allegations were presented to this board to show that this is not me saying that's the truth, because we still need time to investigate. We still need time to understand. But it appeared to be potentially a shell or a pass through of a entity to get this award. I think that needs to take place. I think it's also provided to us where it's direct correlation on specific projects in a neighboring city in DC that shows that this prime was also working in the same behavior that was alleged to this same exact subcontractor. After a month of the administration holding off us voting on this, after that protest, after it was deferred, somehow the prime is able to identify local Baltimore-based businesses to provide functions in the MBE program. Again, historically, systematically, these local companies have been held out of these types of very large contracts for far too long. And I can't think of a more relevant item that has come before this board that kind of illustrates the problems of the way that we've handled MWBE goals, MWBE participation, and growth of small businesses in the city of Baltimore than this one right here. And the idea that the administration wants to push this through and rush this through, to me, seems extremely problematic and goes to the integrity of our entire MWBE process. With that, I have severe concerns based off of the allegations, not anything that has been found. In a month, we've heard from the law department that the investigation is still going on. We still do not have clear answers. There was concerns about who was operating the company. There was concerns about whether the company was functioning here in the city of Baltimore. There were concerns about whether the company misled in some of the documentation that was provided. These are serious allegations. And in order for us to uphold the public's trust as it relates to the functionality of this board, in order for us to get in front of things and sustainably drive down issues that have plagued our city for far too long, like crime, we must develop ways to provide real opportunities for Baltimoreans through Baltimore-based companies. Again, I think that what brought us to this point is really problematic to me. I guess you guys clearly understand what I know. I think at a minimum, we should be rebidding this, or if not, going down to the second lowest bidder as it relates to the lack of explicit language that's currently in the letter of the law associated with a situation like this. With that, I am done. Are there any additional questions or concerns from members of this board? We will not be taking additional comments from the public. I see the hand of ACES, but in all fairness, we're going to move on. We have a motion on the floor. So it's been moved and it's been properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this matter, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. I'm a nay. Please note that it's a vote of 4-1. This award is granted to Alderman Schutte. Thank you for the representatives from ACES as well as from the representatives from Alderman Schutte for joining us today. The next item in front of the board on non-routine agenda can be found on page 45, number 13, Bureau of Procurement, contract number B50005554, Management of Parking Garages Group, number 4. Parking Authority this has been moved to non-routine now. At this point, I believe Mr. Little from the Parking Authority is on to speak on behalf of this item. Mr. Little, if you're on, the floor is yours.
Hello, My name is Peter Little, Executive Director with the Parking Authority of Baltimore City. Good morning, Mr. President, City Administrator, Mr. Comptroller, Mr. Director, and Mr. City Solicitor. I think that procurement is going to speak to this issue because it was a clerical error by a former procurement officer that brings this item to the board today. So I will defer to Ms. Keisha Brown.
Ms. Brown, from procurement, are you on?
Yes, sir. I was waiting for you to acknowledge me.
Yes, ma'am. The floor is yours.
President Mosby, Mr. Shorter, on behalf of the mayor and Mr. Comptroller and other members of the board, the Bureau of Procurement is asking the board to correct, ratify, and increase contract B5000-5554, management of parking garages for Group 4. If you don't mind, Mr. President, my procurement manager is here. Mr. Bolu Alawusuchi, who actually identified the correction and presented it to me to make this recommendation to the board. I'd like to yield the floor to him if you approve of that.
Yes, Ms. Brown, Mr. Alawashudi, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President and member of the board. My name is Bolu Oluwasuji, and I work for the Bureau of Procurement. This contract in question was awarded in 2019, I believe, based on the management fee rather than the operating expenses. The board later actually read management fee, but exclude the operating expenses. However, during the operation of the contract, the parking authority will send their budget to Bureau of Procurement, and then the money is added to the contract. And this year, the parking authority was trying to do an increase on the contract, and that was when I uncovered that there was an error in the amount. The award amount was $36 rather than it would have been $36, which include the estimated operating expenses, which was excluded in the board letter. So there's a need for us to clarify that and to ratify the spending of the operating expenses, and then have additional money for the upcoming fiscal year. And that was why we came back to the board for correction of that error and the increase of the contract to be able to pay the operation of the parking garages.
Thank you, Mr. Oluwasaji. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board? I believe, Ms. Comptroller, you have some. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I guess this question is for, procurement and not the parking authority. I'm just still a little fuzzy on the $7.5 million as opposed to 36. So are you saying that it wasn't a miscalculation as much as it was a just failing to calculate the operating costs as in? Ms. Brown, can you go over that part again?
Yes, it wasn't so much of a calculation as it was an oversight, a very huge oversight. And as we said, this contract predates us. So the contract was awarded on June 5th, 2019 for $36. That was part of the bid. The $36 was for the management fee, and that's the annual fee. The actual contract for operating expenses is the $3.5 million, Mr. Comptroller. So we're presenting it transparently back to the board to make the corrective action and ask the board to approve the corrective action that took place on June 5th, 2019.
Okay, so when this contract was approved, there was discussion at that meeting, I understand, of a protest. And in fact, the contract had been deferred from the board's previous meeting of May 29th, 2019, following discussion of the same protest. In the course of either of those hearings, you're saying the issue of operating expenses was never raised?
And I can speak intelligently to that. At the time of this contract award, I was not serving in this capacity.
Okay. Okay.
If I could provide a little bit of background.
Sure.
Sorry, Mr. President. Again, this is Pete Little with the Executive Director with the Parking Authority. Under these contracts with the city that the parking operators have with the city in order to operate their garages, the parking operators, and in this case, SP Plus, they collect all of the revenues at the city garages and they deposit those revenues directly into city accounts. On a monthly basis, the operators of these city garages pay all of the expenses to operate the garages, all of the payroll, all the maintenance expenses, every expense associated with the garage. They pay them directly from their own funds. At the end of each month, they provide the parking authority and the city with a statement of those, a detailed statement of those expenses, which we then review. And then on a monthly basis, they are reimbursed those operating expenses and the management fee that's due to them each month. The mistake that was made by procurement was in that original board letter to reflect only the management fees, when in fact it should have been the management fees and the operating expenses that should be reimbursed to the operators each month. And so this item seeks to correct that so that we can pay the operator for those operating expenses that they've expended now for the last 8 months. It's been a full 8 months that they're due the reimbursement of those expenses. So I hope that clarifies this.
Well, as is often the case, it clarifies, but then provides additional avenues for questioning. So if they take all the parking receipts and give them to the city, and then we pay them for their operating expenses, and the management fee is literally $36. So how did they make money?
Well, you would have to ask them, the operators themselves, but I can tell you, based on my personal experience from being in the private sector, that these 3 garages in particular are some of the best and some of the most high-profile garages in the city. Any parking operator would want to have their name associated with this. So I would imagine for marketing reasons, they wanted to win this bid. Another factor is that, as you likely know, the city mandates that the employees of these companies pay a living wage, which is higher than the prevailing wage for parking employees here in the city, which is a good thing. That's a fair wage.
Right.
That helps them to attract very good employees, which helps them to build a bench of well-qualified parking employees here in the city. So those are a few reasons why they might want to bid such a low amount to manage these garages.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. They collect all the parking receipts. They give us all of it.
That is correct.
And then they list their expenses for managing, which apparently is $3.5 million between June 5th, 2019 and June 2nd, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And we pay those and those expenses that they're billing us for are literally money that they have spent out of pocket managing the garage.
That's correct.
So they haven't been paid $3.5 million for almost 2 years.
Well, I think procurement can note that. We're paid some of that already.
Yeah, let me rephrase that question. it sounds like they're spending roughly $1.75 million a year to operate these garages. And after the first year of that, we didn't, how often are we supposed to be paying them their managing expenses? I mean, their operating expenses.
On a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis. So we have never paid them operating expenses since June of 2019.
I think Ms. Brown can respond to that. They were paid some, but I do know for the past 8 months, they have not been paid, at least.
Ms. Brown?
I can't speak to the payment of the contract. I'm not for sure how they were being invoiced and paid. I can speak to the contract value, and the contract value was for $36. Hence lie the problem of our investigative action and asking for corrective action because we were unable to draw down on the contract.
So, Mr. President, I'm not sure about the next set of questions because they go back to actions that occurred back in 2019 when literally none of us were here on the board. Wait, no, except for me. No, Mr. Garbark wasn't. What I'm curious about is, did SP beat out other parking operators who had proposed a higher management fee, but had proposed lower operating costs, such that this contract was not really the low bid? Has anyone confirmed that one way or the other since this issue was uncovered?
Well, I was here.
I can say something about that. I think the way the contract was set up at that time was just for us for their management fees, because the operating fees cannot be. It's not. We can't predict what the operating expenses is going to be. I think it's based on the usage and on monthly basis. So, but the management fee is standard, and that was why the contract was asking the respondents to provide their management fees, not the operating expenses at that time. However, I think when we go to the board for the award, the parking authority with Bureau of Procurement should have estimated what the operating expenses will be historically, and then ask for that amount on the board letter. That was the key factor that was omitted in that particular board letter.
Maybe this question should go back to Mr. Little. Is SP a local firm?
No, they're a national firm. But they have a local presence, obviously.
So, is it a fair is it a correct if slanted observation to say it sounds like a big national firm came in and underbid all the local firms to take a contract that they could afford to not make a lot of money on, with the potential side effect, if not intention, of taking work away from local firms such that it would reduce their potential competition in the future?
That is an incorrect assumption.
Okay.
I was familiar with procurement's process for the selection. The last go round, it included a lot of other categories, such as their technical ability. Frankly, a local presence was weighted in to the decision making. Management fee was another factor as well too. And so they did win it. I'm not sure if they had the very lowest management fee, or I can't remember what the management fees were for other firms, but I would simply point to the fact that we do have a small local MBE and WBE firm that through this same procurement process that procurements use to manage the garages has been able to win 2 other sets of garages, the management of 2 other garages. You may be familiar with PMS Parking, which is located here in the city. They operate 2 other sets of garages and have won those opportunities through this very same process.
Did SP compete in those processes?
I believe they did. I believe they've competed for every set of management contracts, yes.
So there was nothing unusual about this other than the fact that we forgot to make a point of authorizing operating expenses in the, although if I understand it, if we can't predict how much operating expenses are going to be.
Well, we can, and just to correct Mr. Bolu from before, we do know how much it costs to operate these garages. We, as the parking authority on behalf of the city, set the budgets for these garages, which can't be exceeded without specific authorization. And in fact, our operators routinely stay within that budget to operate these garages. So we dictate what the budgets for the garages will be. We know what the hours of operation should be, what the prevailing wages are, the living wages, and can calculate out what those budgets should be.
So in that case, when they're submitting operating expenses for reimbursement, do they also have to submit receipts?
Yes.
To show that, so if you budget that they'll probably spend $50,000 a month on cleaning, and they are able to get the garages cleaned for $30,000, you'll only reimburse them for $30,000.
That's correct.
Yes, it's not like they get to pocket that $20,000 difference between what you thought it would cost them and what they actually spent.
That's correct.
So they really have no way to make money on this contract in excess of the $36 management fee.
Now, there is one item, I think it may have been noted in the original contract. Some of these companies are self-insured. And many companies in the country are self-insured.
Sure.
The city is self-insured.
The city is self-insured, right?
Right. And just like with the city, if they can manage their risk, manage the liabilities and the risks at these facilities well, then there might be some profit available there. But again, we set the budget for what we will reimburse for liability insurance here as well too. It is one that is fair to them, but within the industry standards, and they can't exceed that in terms of their reimbursement for the liability insurance. That may be one small opportunity where they may have some ability if they manage the risk properly, where they might make some profit. Now that inures to the benefit of the city, of course, too. If they are focused on managing the risk at these garages, that inures to our benefit also.
So let me make sure I'm understanding that. So if we budget or you project that a parking operator might spend $10,000 a year on insurance premiums for the garages, and because they self-insure, they can technically generate a receipt for whatever they want to say for how much it costs them to self-insure. Like they can say, we're putting $10,000 a month into, or a year or whatever, into an account in order to protect our potential liability. So then you would pay them up to whatever you budget for the cost of insurance. And that would be the one area where if they didn't actually spend that much, technically that would be profit.
Right. But they also run the risk, of course, if they spend more than that they've taken additional loss, right?
Sure. So how difficult would it be to get that exact number of what it is that the city allows for insurance, so that we would know what the maximum amount of potential profit would be, in terms of what they're actually making off of managing these garages?
Yeah, we could provide that to the board, certainly. Yeah, we have those budgets for insurance for each garage.
Okay. I guess the only other question I would have, Mr. President, is, and this goes back to procurement, is what particular measures have been put in place since then to ensure that we don't make this kind of mistake again in a future contract?
Would you like for me to respond, Mr. President?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay. Okay.
Yes, Chief.
Thank you. We have since realigned our office, and we've, with the support of our finance director, and we have 2 separate teams now. So there's teams of procurement specialists too, which are our certified staff that deal with more complex and ambiance type of contracts of this nature for making recommendations for award. In addition, it goes through another layer of revision of review by the procurement manager before the ultimate recommendation comes to my desk as the acting chief procurement officer prior to submitting to the board. So we put measurements in place to assure that the bids are read correctly, the contracts are executed correctly, in addition to the board letter being presented to the comptroller's office. So we feel pretty confident about that, and it's that very strategic alignment that we put in place is what caught the error in this particular instance.
okay, that's all the questions I had, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this time, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none at this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving this item, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is now approved. The next item, and I believe the last item, unless the comptroller corrects me, on the non-routine agenda can be found on pages 106 and 107. Department of Finance fiscal year 22, Visit Baltimore Incorporated, Baltimore Tourism Improvement District, financial plan and special assessment rate. A protest was received on this item by the Baltimore African American Tourism Council Incorporated. This item was deferred from last week's agenda. We'll first hear from Al Hutchinson of Visit Baltimore. President Hutchinson, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the board. Al Hutchinson, President and CEO at Visit Baltimore. Let me just first say that Visit Baltimore, along with our stakeholder community, we always have prided ourselves on celebrating diversity. And I have provided to this board just some samples of some of the work that our organization has done the last few years to celebrate diversity. We've rebranded our organization, and we really went through a stakeholder group of over 150 different community stakeholders that helped us land in a place that is a very inclusive brand message now, really has a strong African-American focus to our brand story, celebrating history, arts, and culture. We also created a bot pass to help our African-American museums and attractions to have discounts. So folks who visit Baltimore, as well as residents, can go to a lot of our cultural attractions and experience them, but have discounts provided to them to do that. We also have a complimentary diversity membership program. Any organization of minority persuasion, women-owned businesses can become a part of Visit Baltimore free for the first 2 years. And the third year, it's at a discounted space. And then we also have a diversity apprenticeship program that we just launched with the Guinness Brewery to make sure we're bringing in people of color who are not really in the travel and tourism industry the way we want to really embrace and encourage more young African Americans, especially, to join our industry. One of the things we did with this particular legislation in question is that we created a diversity inclusion grant program. So when opposition back in 2018 came up for this tourism improvement district, we listened to the council member at that time, Councilman Pinkett, to provide a grant program. So when folks from minority communities wanted to create festivals or to create marketing opportunities in their neighborhoods, they could go through an approval process to receive grant approval to grow their initiative and also grow their interests. So we at Visit Baltimore, celebrating diversity has been very important. The Tourism Improvement District was set up to make us more competitive in our industry. I'll just give you a couple quick data points and I'll leave it here, is that this was set up to really make Baltimore City much more competitive with Philly, DC, Nashville, Charlotte, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, to drive visitation to our community to help with hotel occupancy. In 2019, hotel occupancy in Baltimore City was around 61%. That's not really a good number to celebrate because we really need to be closer to 75% occupancy. But when you look at that and compare it to where we were in 2020, we went down to 34%. We're now back May of this year to 45% occupancy. Several hotels have closed in Baltimore City. So the Tourism Improvement District, which was approved in December of 2019, the pandemic hit in March of 20. We really have not had a chance to catch up on collecting money, but this was set up to really create sales and marketing initiatives for the city. It does have some emphasis on African American conventions and leisure travel, but we need to grow occupancy in Baltimore to be competitive. If we don't have visitation coming to Baltimore City, then we don't have tour companies to support, hotels to support, or restaurants to support. So the Tourism Improvement District is set up to create that marketing and sales initiatives that we need to make Baltimore City relevant in the travel and tourism space. And as we bring visitors here with messaging, then no doubt we will be able to support our Black-owned businesses, museums, and attractions. But we will definitely use and have been using some of the revenue just through Visit Baltimore's general fund budget, as well as through the Tourism Improvement District, to create more storytelling to impact our small businesses, specifically the African American owned businesses, some of which do not have marketing dollars to tell their stories nationally. So we are very much there to amplify their storytelling, to make sure we're driving traffic to Baltimore, and we have to reopen our industry after the pandemic. But we believe that the Tourism Improvement District is set up to be a very inclusive story, to help all communities, but it's not really been set up to handle operational cost for any entity in Baltimore City. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, President Hutchinson. At this point, are there any questions or concerns for the president of Visit Baltimore? Hearing and seeing none, there was a protest. I believe we have support. They're not going to speak from, I'm just going to read it on the record. Terry Donahue, Marriott Waterfront President of the DMC, Greg Brown from the Hilton, Ted Jabrar from Harbor Magic Hotel, Tracy Poole from Hyatt, Juan Webster from Pendry, Jason Curtis from Hotel Indigo, and Amy Royer, Maryland Hotel, and a representative from Maryland Hotel and Lodging. From a protest perspective, we're going to have the person who's the original protester to this lead the comments for the protesters, and then we'll turn it over to any additional members who would like to provide clarity to the protest. The ask is that we try not to repeat points that have been made prior. I'm going to give everyone, with the exception of Mr. Fields, 2 minutes to make their points. Mr. Fields, just like I provided the opportunity to the president of Visit Baltimore, I will provide you the same deference to speak at will. Again, we had this on at the previous agenda. If we could focus on any new points or any points that we think will persuade or you want to accentuate to this particular board, I'll give you the opportunity for it this time. So, Mr. Fields, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir, and I hope everyone can hear me.
If you could speak up a little louder, Mr. Fields.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
That's a little better.
Okay, first of all, I want to take this opportunity to really thank the Board of Estimates for this unique opportunity from people from the community to have a voice in this particular instance. Often we haven't had this opportunity. And so hats off to the board, to the chair, to the comptroller, all of you who are new members of our Board of Estimates. I am thoroughly in appreciation of this opportunity. I've been doing tourism in Baltimore for 28 years. It's been seldom that a chair of the Baltimore City Board of Estimates has given an opportunity to myself, others, to say something to the board. And I really, really appreciate this opportunity. And I spoke last week concerning the lack of inclusion, diversity, and truly equity in this new money. Today, I want to talk about to you 3 other elements that's missing in this particular bill: accountability, transparency, authority, and the lack of the public trust in what we're talking about today. I really think the Baltimore Tourism Improvement District is a good idea. Been in tourism all my life. I believe in tourism, but I also believe when you have a great idea, and the great idea is enabled by legislation, that legislation has to reflect the population of the area in which it's being done. Visit Baltimore, I've worked with them for my entire career. Over 7 different administrations, 7 different CEOs. All respect to Mr. Hutchinson. He had to force them to create the diversity initiative for minorities to join because the fee beforehand was $650, which we as African Americans and many minorities could not afford. We had to force them to do that. 14 years ago, we had to force Visit Baltimore to be subject to the MBE, WBE laws because they were doing $100,000, $200,000 bids with no procurement for MBE, WBE. We had to force that to happen. We had to force them to create a tourism grant program on this bill. When it went through City Council, we stopped it at 3rd reader for lack of inclusion. Councilman Pickett, on our behalf, met with Visit Baltimore. We asked for a $200,000 grant fund and a subcommittee on African American tourism. And they would support the Black Arts and Entertainment District. Those were our concessions. In 2019, we said, yes, let the bill go through. Well, they came back with a $75,000 grant fund, and the max you could apply for is $5,000. That may be good from some small community groups doing small things, but there's no way that's going to really significantly impact the African American tourism stakeholders. Thirdly, through a mandated piece of legislation, Visit Baltimore is already receiving 100% of Baltimore City's taxpayers' dollars for tourism subsidies. They already have one monopoly. Problem with the new legislation for the great idea, the new legislation is bad. It was put in place under the regime of Catherine Pugh. We know how that regime ended. It was signed into law by the past interim mayor. We voted him out because this is the kind of stuff we don't want to see happening in our city. We have issues. All need help. We all need healing, not just the hotels. Everybody is hurting from COVID 2020 that year. And if we as a city see new money coming, how can we sit back and say, let's just include these folks? And worse than all of that, if you really take a look at Board of Estimates bill, the City Council bill is 16 pages. At least 12 of those pages have problems that we should be concerned about. One of which is to give, and I have no disrespect for any hotelier, they know I bring bus groups and reunions to these hoteliers, but to give new money
That's really the citizens of Baltimore's money. We give it to the city hall to take care of and steward it for us. But we are never going to sit back and give a district management committee made of hoteliers who we respect, but we know general managers in hotels come and go. Why should we, the citizens of Baltimore, say to our Board of Estimates, waive your authority and stewardship of our money and give it over to these folks? They already have one monopoly. This creates another monopoly, and when you look at the bill, which I have done, 12 pages have problems. One of the biggest problems is if you, the Board of Estimates, approve this today, you will give a second monopoly to Visit Baltimore, cloaked under something they call the District Management Committee, and they have it such a be 10 years. In 10 years, this fund could be millions and millions of dollars. It could go over 50 million, 100 million. And that can help not only Visit Baltimore, but it can help all of us. When Visit Baltimore says we want more money to promote, and you promote the African American
I'm on an important Zoom call. I can't leave yet. And I'm about to speak next. I need at least 10 or 15 minutes.
Mr. Womack, if you could go on mute, please.
And so, sir, I'm going to wrap up real quickly because I've made my points. Inclusion, diversity, equity, number one. Then accountability, transparency, who's going to have the authority. We can't, as citizens of Baltimore, ask our Board of Estimates to give this new money over as an authority to these new people. We don't know any of them. We respect them. Thank God Ms. Poole comes out of Howard University and joined the Hyatt here in Baltimore. Mind you, the first tourism subsidy hotel in the city. We respect you coming to our city. We love you for coming. Don't join in with Visit Baltimore and say you're going to include Black folk in any new money that needed. It's needed so desperately at the players, Arts Social Club, Black American Museum, our programs, our projects that we have to go to Visit Baltimore and ask for support. Family Reunion Expo, killed. African American Taste of Soul, we tried to do. Baltimore Black Heritage Trail, we tried to do. Charm City Tourism Award. We've been trying to do all this stuff on bootstraps, no money, and we have to go to Visit Baltimore because that's who tourism, that's where you go. And Visit Baltimore says we have no money to support significantly what you guys are doing, but we can buy a little bit of this, we can buy a little bit of that. So in closing, I have 3 recommendations, maybe 4. First, we recommend the Board of Estimates just delay this vote because tourism is still down in Baltimore. It's not going to happen until maybe 22, 23. We have time for the new members of the Board of Estimates to really digest this information. Look at what legislation Catherine Pugh and Jack Young was pushing through. The reason we voted for Mayor Scott, Council President Mosley, Comptroller Henry is not to go back to doing the same business we've been doing and letting certain people control our dollars as taxpayers in the city. Number 2, we would ask that the mayor's office and the Board of Estimates office create a 60-day, 90-day task force and give people from our side of the table a chance to voice our opinion, and you'll hear from a few more in a moment. Number 3, as I mentioned, Visit Baltimore already has a tourism monopoly. In the last 4 to 5 years, they have received over $50 million. I would say, Mr. Comptroller, it's time for a full-blown audit. Let's look at a 5-year history of what money Visit Baltimore received and what did they spend that money on. That gives us an idea as a city where the last $50 million has went. And lastly, I would ask the Board of Estimates to ensure to me that I will no longer be subjected to the whistleblower tactics that's been used against me during the year of COVID 2020, because I have raised my hand, I have brought the other side of the coin. How do we benefit? How does our community benefit? So the tourism industry, I receive some support, but often I'm cut out and left out. In fact, there was supposed to be a public hearing on this particular topic before it came to you guys. It went to the Daily Record. That's where they advertised it at. Not in the Baltimore Sun, not in the Baltimore Business Journal, not in the Afro, not in the Baltimore Times. They selected the Daily Record. Good paper, but not widely read. So people like myself, we haven't had a chance to really get public input at that public hearing. So I would just ask the board not to disapprove, but not to approve. Let's hold up. Let's get all the facts on the table. Let's hear from our citizens. Let's even hear from the new members of the Baltimore City Council who haven't had a chance to digest this bill. 7 members of the council who voted on the bill are no longer on the council. None of the Board of Estimates people from 2019 are on the board. So we're just saying to Mr. Hutchinson, respectfully today, let's not rush this through. You have time, but there's no way the citizens of Baltimore will allow a new entity, District Management Committee, to be in charge of millions of our dollars just because Visit Baltimore says so. Visit Baltimore is a private organization. They got a contract with the city by law. They are the sole source for our tourism dollars, some 14, 15 million a year. Question is, let's take a look at what you're doing with that money first. And then the city of Baltimore should be able to sit down and say, you don't decide that we, the city, gets 1.5% and you get 98.5%. Visit Baltimore nor the District Management Committee should make that decision. The money is not coming from them. The money is coming from the customers who overnight in our city. If you're a Baltimore resident, you stay in a hotel, you pay this fee as well. And lastly, in closing, as we move forward in 2021 under this new administration, we are asking you folks, the ones we voted for, to look out for our interests.
Mr. Fields, I realize that you are presenting your case. If you could speak specifically to this matter, this has nothing to do with the electoral process. I've allowed you to talk about that on several different occasions. Right now, the point of this topic is to talk about the substance and relevance of why you oppose what we're doing today.
Okay.
So if you could conclude.
Thank you, sir. I'll conclude with this statement. We would ask for a review of this matter, and I would suggest a fair breakdown of the millions of dollars and how they are allocated, but more importantly, I don't believe that we should just turn it over to a newly created DMC and very little oversight. I just ask that you take a look at it, take a hard look at it, just make the best decision. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Mr. Fields, for that. We have several folks who have signed up. Again, I'm going to give each person, I provided the deference to the original protester to speak as long into the substance of what he wanted to speak to. Regarding the additional protests, we'll give 2 minutes to speak. Just for clarity, for the record, so everyone kind of understands and knows, the DMC was codified, as Mr. Fields said, through law, through this Baltimore City Council, from the authorization of the state of Maryland. This is something that basically the hotels wanted to assess themselves on, to provide inside of this tourism fund. 100% of the funds are generated as it relates to individuals staying at the hotels. And as Mr. Hutchinson says, it goes back into monies used for marketing and branding with the idea of augmenting new tourism to the city of Baltimore. So just want to make sure that we're completely clear on what the authorization legislation provided, what the city council voted on, where the money is coming from, and then ultimately how the money is distributed. So at this point, I'm going to read through a list. I'll ask everyone to go on mute, except the person's name that I call. First up, I have Mr. Vince Leggett, Blacks of the Chesapeake. Mr. Leggett, are you on?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Vince Leggett. I'm the founder and president of the Blacks of the Chesapeake Foundation, and we document the contributions that African Americans have made to the maritime and seafood processing industry throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. We have been working with Mr. Fields over the last 20 to 25 years on heritage tourism, and again, just trying to find ways to participate in the whole heritage tourism industry. What I would say is that it has been a difficult uphill climb for many of the community-based groups that are not affiliated with major blue chip organizations, colleges, or universities. But again, with the rich heritage of Baltimore's port, Baltimore Harbor, we really support many of the points that Mr. Fields made in terms of trying to make this process more inclusive. Case in point, we are working with the American Fisheries Society that's having an international conference in Baltimore from November 6th and November 10th. And part of what we are looking at is what facilities these 8,000 guests that can visit, better understand. And so often groups like ours have difficulty finding the on-ramp to the resources, particularly as we work with national and international groups coming to Baltimore. And so I hope that the points that Mr. Fields made, and I embrace many of those, find voice within this process. And so at this point, I'll just yield, but just weigh in to say groups like ours really need opportunities to compete on a fair playing field as we continue to try to celebrate the maritime and seafood heritage within Baltimore, and particularly when we are partnering with major groups bringing 8,000 guests from around the world to Baltimore. We want to make sure that we have opportunities to showcase Baltimore as well as the other Baltimore.
Thank you, Mr. Leggett. In closing, could you wrap up?
I'm wrapped, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Leggett, for taking your time out and providing us your perspective. Next on my list is Reverend Kobe Little, President of the Baltimore chapter of the NAACP. Mr. President Little, are you on? Hearing and not seeing Mr. Little. I think next up on the list is Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, the floor is yours. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Reverend Little is here.
Did he speak? Oh, Reverend Little, the floor is yours. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to the members of the Board of Estimates and all assembled. The real question here for the Baltimore NAACP is, what does equity look like in a city that's 62% Black? We support in concept, the idea of a Baltimore Tourism Improvement District. We want to see tourism rise in Baltimore. We know that members of our community who work in the tourism industry benefit when the tourism industry does well. But we do have considerable concerns about the emphasis and the support for African-American tourism, heritage tourism in Baltimore, and tourism provided by African-American providers. We support the idea of a 7% designation that would be used specifically to fund African-American tourism initiatives. In fact, we believe that if Visit Baltimore is really committed to diversity, that they too would support this idea and it wouldn't be a point of contention. Listen, the fact of the matter is that the tourism industry, by and large in Baltimore, is not owned or operated by African Americans or people of color. And that there is an equity gap there. What that means is that you're not going to have the voices of the African American community at the table to promote new tourism products focused on the African American experience that will create business opportunities for African American, not to mention the historical context. So what we would suggest is that Visit Baltimore would walk the walk and talk the talk of diversity by supporting a 7% set aside. Our experience over the last 2.5 years with Visit Baltimore is that there have perhaps been good intentions, but there hasn't been a diversity, a follow through on diversity.
President Little, if you could wrap up.
Yes, sir. We've reached out to Visit Baltimore to be engaged in a number of different initiatives and haven't seen any follow through. We're hopeful that with the CIAA, we'll see something different. But we believe that equity looks like Visit Baltimore supporting a 7% set aside. The NAACP supports a 7% set aside.
Thank you, President Little. At this point, we're going to turn to Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members of the Board of Estimates and everybody participating I'm going to be extremely brief. I won't need 2 minutes. I'll probably need 30 seconds because, quite frankly, most of the points have been made. Although I am in full support of the supplemental protest and the initiative by the African American Tourism Association, I want to be clear that I also am in support of Visit Baltimore, the work they've done in terms of being the primary face of tourism in Baltimore and the sort of nexus for tourism in Baltimore. What I think that this is fundamentally about is clear. I think that the speakers before me have made it clear. First, Brother Al Hutchins, as far as I'm concerned, has done a commendable job spearheading Visit Baltimore. But what's missing, there is still a piece missing. The piece that's missing is making sure that the inclusion that he even spoke of earlier in his conversation is sort of codified, that it's mandated in a way that guarantees that inclusion happens across the board in, I think, a more pronounced and definable way. And so that's what I think this conversation is ultimately about. No part of it, at least from my perspective, is about being against anything that Baltimore is doing or that Visit Baltimore is doing. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
That was much longer than 30 seconds, but less than 2 minutes. We'll take it. Thank you, Mr. Womack, for your for coming today. Next up on my list, I have Peter Brooks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Brooks, I yield the floor to you. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Comptroller, members of the committee, and distinguished civil servants, Mr. Hutchinson. I rise in support of Mr. Fields as an example of this inclusion issue. My great-grandfather founded the United Mutual Brotherhood of Liberty in the 1880s. This was an organization that was before the NAACP, before the Black Panthers, and yet was the model for them to follow. It started in Baltimore. My grandfather from Baltimore, Mr. Cab Calloway, was one of the founders of rock and roll. This is an underutilized resource, as well as my Aunt Blanche, who was the first African-American sex symbol. I just wanted to say that, you know, we are not utilizing these resources to the fullest advantage by the lack of inclusion. And I think, although, as Mr. Hutchinson pointed out, we are in competition with all of these other cities like Cleveland, Richmond, Philadelphia, et cetera, but from the perspective of African-American history, specifically the Harlem Renaissance, Baltimore far exceeds any of those cities in Black history. In fact, I would go on the record as saying Baltimore had a bigger impact on the Harlem Renaissance than any other American city, save for New York itself. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. You as well was under 2 minutes. Really appreciate that. Next up, we have Ms. Francine Allen. Ms. Allen, the floor is yours.
Good morning, all. My name is Francine Allen, and I own Self-Development Success, and I've given over 30 years of public service to Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. For the record, in a city that is and has always been majority Black, it's a disgrace that the city of Baltimore does not include African-American tourism sites, businesses, or entrepreneurs in the ongoing city budget by supporting and her many visitors coming to see the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture, the Banneker Douglas Museum, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, the Frederick Douglass Isaac Myers Maritime Park, the E.B. Blake National Museum and Cultural Center, the African Art Museum of Maryland, the Baltimore Black Heritage Tours, the Downtown Cultural Arts Center, and there are many others that I could mention, but I won't in the interest of time. None of these historical treasures have been supported with regular financial inclusion in the Baltimore City budget, but Baltimore City has and continues to profit from the traffic brought to Baltimore City that is generated strictly from these visitors to these priceless profit-generating entities. I'm almost done. I'm asking that the 7% annual designated set-aside grant be included in the fiscal year 22 budget and every year thereafter to support African-American tourism sites, businesses, and entrepreneurs who live, work, and play in Baltimore City every day.
The city has long benefited from these entities without reciprocating support for Black tourism sites, programs, projects, museums, attractions, businesses, and entrepreneurs. From the future budgetary inclusion of $255,500 for the fiscal year 22 budget year as your honest show of goodwill, good faith to the citizens from whom you continue to profit. And I yield. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Ms. Allen. And then last but certainly not least on my list is Ms. Marsha Reeves-Jews. The floor is yours, Ms. Jews.
Thank you all. I appreciate your ability to allow me to speak today. I've been in the tourism industry for well over 20 years. And in Baltimore, I've been at the Frederick Douglass Museum, Alvin Ailey, and Career Communications Group for the Black Engineer of the Year Awards Conference, bringing people to the city and understand all that goes with that. It is really important to me as a Black entrepreneur for us to be looking at how we create an environment where minority businesses, specifically African-American businesses, there should be a percentage in every department of this city that has a Black set aside mandate for how you spend money within these organizations. As far as I'm concerned, I understand that, the hotels have really suffered and, I think many of them were able to help a lot of the homeless people and they took up some of that offset. But we have to really sit down and think about how are we going to build our businesses? What is the legacy? And, I think somebody was talking about the legacy of Pennsylvania Avenue. We have the Billie Holiday. We have all the things that are going on over there. We have districts that have already started to create. We have poor, great Blacks in wax that they need an influx of money, and it's a huge attraction. And how are we not even supporting that? What are the other issues and the other programs that we don't even know and they're not here at this table? We have to do an assessment. All we're asking, and I really support this, that we take a step back. Let's really look at where we are and what these entities are and how we can help and support them. It's not fair. Let's just talk about that. It's just not fair. And people get support on so many different levels. And many of these Black organizations, including myself, we're small business and we're trying to make it, but we are making a contribution to the tourism industry. We're making a contribution. And other people are getting a lot of money out of here. And I'm not just talking about Visit Baltimore, but across the board, the city should have the opportunity to go. And thank you, President Mosby. I appreciate you all letting me talk, but I got most talkative when I was in high school. Thank you.
I'll give you 15 more seconds to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. All I ask is for Mr. Hutchinson, you've done a wonderful job. So I want you to hear that, but I do want you to really consider what we're talking about here and sit down with your board and for us as a city to move together and support everybody in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you, Ms. Jews. So at this point, are there any questions or concerns from any members of the board? Yes, Mr. Comptroller.
So I did want to make a quick comment just about the request that we audit Visit Baltimore. That is not in the 2022 audit plan to audit Visit Baltimore. So I want to, if Mr. Fields wants to follow up with that for a future year, I'm happy to have that conversation with him. But I did want to ask Mr. Hutchinson right now. I went back to the budget for the Tourism Improvement District, and I was going off of the comments from last week before we deferred this. When asked for about the 7% set-asides, my understanding was that this money was basically focused on marketing. And that is indeed the lion's share of it. But I wanted to ask what financial incentives, parentheses, M and C stood for.
Financial incentives and what? Mr. Controller?
Under
I'm not looking at what you're looking at.
Oh, I'm sorry. On page 107 of the agenda, we have the Tourism Improvement District's budget with an FY21 forecast and a column for FY22 budget with a total revenue reported to the city of $3.5 million. The major categories of the budget are marketing and advertising, sales and destination development, and administration and operations. And under the sales and destination development, there is a category called financial incentives, and then it says parentheses M and C. And I didn't know what is that marketing and communications?
No, you're close, Mr. Comptroller. That's meetings and conventions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we need to get away from acronyms, but that's what that stands for. And so what the incentive line item means, most conventions don't go to any city in America, with the exception of maybe Vegas, without you incentivizing them to come. So most of these groups, we have to provide some dollars, whether it's offsetting expenses at the convention center, or helping them with a reception. There's money that we would have to use to incentivize groups. And that goes for African-American groups as well. So that line item is not for any specific group, but it's for us to woo future conventions and meetings to Baltimore City.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
No, thank you, Comptroller. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from members of the board? This is an item that I asked to be deferred from last meeting to this meeting for many of the reasons that were mentioned. As I promised the board and to the citizens of Baltimore, I would take the opportunity to reach out not only to President Hutchinson, but also to Mr. Fields. I've had the ability of speaking with both since that previous meeting. I think that we are all aware of the historic and systematic issues around African-American cultural institutions here in the city of Baltimore, restoration of African-American centers, infrastructure, as well as the promotion of African-American history. I'm a son of Baltimore. I love Baltimore City history, and I will put our history up against any other African-American history in this entire country. I think this is literally an epicenter for the history, and I think we have to do so much more. As a delegate, we were able to drive historic amount of funding to the arena players. We were able to get the African-American Cultural Arts District stood up. I know this administration is particularly in favor of continuing to promote and kind of go against some of the disproportionate lack of investment of the past associated with the African-American cultural arts and institutions. I know that Mr. Hutchinson, the first time I met him as president, we talked about Visit Baltimore maps to ensure that they included Pennsylvania Avenue and places like Druid Hill Park that connected African-American communities to the downtown districts in which our visitors were receiving maps. Many of these things are incremental steps in the right direction. I guess I'm here to say that I think we are looking at a major issue that deserves a lot of attention, but we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole with this particular funding. Again, this was money that was assessed by the hotels on themselves to their guests for the promotion, marketing, and branding for future tourism. I think that cycle makes sense, but the city must do a better job and find funding to ensure that African-American culture, arts, and institution is uplifted in a way that the city has never been able to do. And as the president of the city council, that is my commitment to the citizens in moving forward. And I think I have a track record of not talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I know Comptroller Henry, as well as Mayor Scott, are on board with that as well. With that, I will ask if there is a motion to approve or disapprove of this item.
I move approval of this item as recommended by Visit Baltimore and the Department of
At this
Finance.
point, there's a motion on the floor to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and it's been properly second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. In closing, I will work with the members of the African American tourism community to develop a way of creating maybe a legislative oversight hearing so we can explore from a Baltimore City capital and budget perspective opportunities in which we are elevating African American history as much as possible. Again, I think that we've made some strides in the right direction, but just like everything else, there's so much more we need, should, and will do. And that's my commitment to the members of the community who came out today, as well as folks who are listening out there in the city of Baltimore. Before we close, are there any additional comments, questions, or concerns from members of the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to echo your words of support on this topic, and also I would encourage members of the African American tourism community to pursue American Rescue Plan funds for the restoration and rehabilitation of some of our historic sites. That money is best suited for capital improvements as opposed to operating funds because it's limited in time. But this would be a great opportunity to take money that is not usually available and use it to restore potential tourism sites or ones that are already tourism sites but need additional help or love to be restored to their former glory and grandeur. And then, as the president says, I think a longer conversation is needed to identify sustainable funding to make sure that there is operational funds for tourism sites going forward. So thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. And
No, thank you, Mr.
I appreciate this conversation.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, there's no new business before the desk. The board will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on Wednesday, June the 30th at 9 a.m. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, please continue to stay safe, follow all health protocols. We're still battling COVID-19. Please wear a mask as much as possible. Please stay socially distanced. Baltimore, we love you.
All right. Is it my imagination or are none of the... Oh, there's the red light. Okay. That's like usually it's on one of those cameras. That's what threw me. Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. As part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings virtually. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0842939. Board of Estimates meetings are broadcast live on Charm TV, Channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at https://www.charmtvbaltimore.com/live-stream. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings virtually while the state of emergency declared by the Mayor of Baltimore and the Governor of Maryland remains in effect, which I think is just one more week. Yeah. I have the following addendum to note. Bureau of Procurement B50006234 Energy Consulting Services. Please note that this solicitation has been canceled. It will be revised and reissued at a later date. I I will now accept a motion on the passage of the addendum.
Move approval of the cancellation of the solicitation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. I have nothing here for number 1, charter bus services.
That was the cancellation.
Oh, what's that?
Energy consultant.
No.
Okay, hold on.
That's energy.
So this should be number 1. So wait a minute.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. It's the labeling. I gotcha. Okay. Thank you. All right. First item is technically the second item, the first one having been canceled. Second item is procurement B500006037, charter bus services. No bid bond required. I guess these are all. Well, let's take that because they both have tickets on them. All right. All right. This bid is from Charter Bus Pros Inc., doing business as Charter Links, in the amount of total sum of $427,200. The second bid is from Woodlawn Motor Coach Incorporated, with a total bid amount of $528,792. The next bid is from Reliable Professional Services, LLC. The total bid amount of $917,142. And then the final bid is from Savel's Transportation Incorporated. Did you? Oh, I'm sorry. Here. With a total bid amount of $92,880.
That is just for one item.
Ah.
Yeah. Item.
That is for item 3 only. So does that mean we have to go back and read the broken out item 3 bids for everybody?
No.
They only responded to item 3.
Yeah, I think the fact that you represented what they responded to is sufficient enough.
Okay, so their bid for item 3 of the 5 items is $92,880.
I move that these bids are sent to the Bureau of Procurement for review.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item, number 3, is procurement B500006232, ethyl alcohol. Invitation for bids for ethyl alcohol. Okay. Not making it easy. All right. The first bid is from Agathos Laboratories Incorporated, with a total bid amount of $73,798.20.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yes, I can, but I'll have to turn back to that page.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, the total bid is $73,798.20. And I'm sorry, there were no bid bonds for this proposal. All right. The next proposal is from First Needs Medical with a total bid of $69,570.
I move that these bids are sent to the Bureau of Procurement for review.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
I'd like to see competition.
I'd like to see competition for thin bid books. Maybe I just like the thin bid books. All right, there we go. All right, the final proposal today is for DPW WC 1285, Caroline Street and vicinity water main replacement, bid bond of 2% if the bid is over $100,000, which seems likely given the size of the bid book. Oh dear. There does not seem to be a duplicate.
Is that?
Is this?
Is that a duplicate?
I don't. Let me find out who this is. And this is Anchor Construction Corporation. Is that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Then this first bid is from Anchor Construction Corporation. With a bid bond in an amount of a total bid of $13,057,154 and no cents. Oh, okay, there we go. Oh, this also goes with Anchor Construction. Okay. All right, the next bid is from Spinello Companies with a bid bond and a total bid of $8,793,300 and no cents. I think that's a record. Is that like 3-point font? That's pretty small.
It is small, yeah.
Okay. The next bid is from Garney Companies Incorporated.
With a bid bond.
With a bid bond. And a total bid of $10,391,000 and no cents. The next bid is from J. Fletcher Creamer and Son Incorporated with a bid bond and a total bid of $8,680,612 and no cents. The next bid is from Monumental Paving and Excavating. It's addendum 1, page 8 of 9.
I don't see a bid bond.
I have one.
You have one?
I have one.
This one didn't?
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Addendum 2, you said?
It says addendum number 1, page 8 of 9. But I have to admit the pages immediately before it are not pages 7. The local hiring law is immediately before it.
Page 8 and 9 is a bid bond.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, okay, but it's not filled out, all right.
Oh, okay, so the copy I have is
Okay.
filled out and signed.
Yeah. And the total bid is not filled out.
Okay, the total bid I have is $8,700,155.55.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. The next one is Civil Construction LLC.
With a bid bond.
With a bid bond and a total bid of $8,310,558 and no cents.
Say 310? You say 310?
I have $8,310,558 and no cents.
Thank you.
Is that different than what yours?
No, I think it's in different order on this one. Addendum 3. Page 2.
What was the one that was marked with the red sign here flag?
Says it's $300.
Oh yeah, that would be very different. Let's go with this one.
Yeah. Got it.
Do they have a bid bond?
They do have a bid bond.
All right. The next bid is from Robert E. Harrington, R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating Company.
With a bid bond?
With a bid bond and a total bid amount of $9,409,560 and no cents.
Yes.
And the final proposal for this contract, the final bid for this proposal is from Metra Industries Incorporated with a bid bond and a total bid of $8,181,000 $317.00. Oh, okay. For just one frightening moment, I thought we had one more to do.
I move that these bids are sent to the Department of Public Works for review.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Our business here being concluded for the day, the Board of Estimates stands in recess until next Wednesday, June 30th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much and stay safe.